Welcome, everyone. I'm excited today to introduce our topic about growing your business with innovation best practices, especially as we think in terms of project, program, and portfolio technology and methodology. Innovation is one of those things that really is super important for organizations to be able to leverage. So today with us, as you know, Advisicon certainly loves to showcase new pieces, topics, and of course the entire spectrum of technology. But where would we be without leveraging innovation, that whole creative side of learning and applying and adapting? In fact, as we think in terms of what happens in the industry, that growing your best practices through innovation is going to be one of the core foundations of how organizations, project teams actually execute and implement. With us today is John and Rose Marshall, which are colleagues of mine. In fact, we've been working together for almost 20 years in the program and portfolio field. In fact, thinking about innovation is one of their core strengths. And I won't say a whole lot because I could sit here and talk most of the 30-minute session about the history we have in managing programs, PMOs, John's patents, but this is an amazing group of resources that you can learn and leverage from. John, you want to just kind of introduce yourselves?
Sure. So I'm John, and that's Rosie over there. And Rosie's going to give the bulk of the talk today, but I'm going to introduce us here. As Tim said, our core is innovation. Rosie and I have both worked in high tech for many years, like a half a century. And we have come to really love innovation itself as a topic. And so we formed a company called Innovation Frameworks because the core of our company is frameworks. We'll be talking about frameworks as a way to encapsulate your innovation best practices. So we founded in 2003, and basically the reason we love frameworks is frameworks blend the extremes of structure and serendipity. And with innovation, you just have to have both. You have to have some order and structure that you get with some project management tools and various kinds of processes and so forth, but you also really have to increase your probability of discovering opportunities and discovering those chance things. In fact, the name serendipity was actually used in Saran Wrap. Saran Wrap was named for serendipity. It's just a kind of an interesting tidbit. Frameworks are wonderful because by combining the creative aspect with the process aspect into one place, it enables you to do discovery-based development. And as we're going to say in a few minutes, we really view innovation as having three parts, and we'll talk about those three parts. But the first part is the front end, the fuzzy front end, and that is a discovery-based, not a schedule-based process. Frameworks help you do that and help you do them quickly. But another aspect of it's very important is frameworks also encapsulate knowledge and encapsulate best practices so that it's not like you have to have a encyclopedia of best practices that you look up every time you're going to do the next thing. They tend to get embedded right within the framework. So we're very excited about frameworks, and we build a lot of our company around that concept. So at this point, I'd like to just tell you what we're going to do in terms of topics today.
Hey, John, do you want Rosie to say hi?
Well,
hello, this is Rosie Marshall, and I'm pleased to be here today. We're excited to work with Tim and the whole Advisicon crew.
Thank you for that, Tim. And
she'll beat you up later, John.
That's trying to find a nice way. Let's see, in putting the television set in the doghouse for tonight. But so the first question is, why now? I mean, we live in these crazy economic times. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is through the roof, and at the same time, half of the country is getting unemployment checks. So what is going on? But what we found through the years is that these crazy times of recessions and turmoil are the time to take the lead and be innovative and devote part of your resources a good part of your resources to innovation. And we made this come real when we had a 5-year contract with several contracts with a food processor, a trade association. We put together an entire program, and it was a remarkable success. And one of the key points is we really pushed those companies to be innovative with their business models, with their products, and with their internal processes. So this is very real. So we're going to talk about why now. Rosie's going to talk about that. And then we're going to give you a lot of different best practice hints, and we're going to focus on one of the best practices is having an innovation mindset and an approach to things, which is kind of different from a normal engineering project approach. Rosie will be talking about how to see the big picture, how to get out of the box, so to speak. And then we'll be talking a little bit about the project and program management aspects, which for innovation are different in some very important respects from the standard engineering portion. And then we'll talk about next steps. All right, so here's Rosie.
Hi, nice to be here today. Thanks so much for joining us. We're really excited about sharing some of the things we've learned over the past years of being parts of innovation, doing program management, and training others in being innovative within our company. So the question is, why innovate now? Why is this important? We are in times of uncertainty. This change is being expected of us, not just avoided, but actually expected. And so these times provide unique new opportunities, and it's time to look for those opportunities with a fresh new perspective. And our favorite guy, Steve Jobs, said, innovation distinguishes between a leader and a follower. And our intention today is to show you some ways you can be a leader and not a follower. So again, we're going to talk about why innovate now. We have learned a lot in the last year about adapting and pivoting. So many of our friends in business have pivoted during this COVID time. Work from home has changed. Our schools, of course, are changed. Our lifestyles have changed. And clearly people have been in survival mode in some ways. But when I worked at IBM, we had a phrase, don't waste a good crisis, which means that a crisis is an opportunity for you to kind of throw everything up in the air and re-examine it. We have a workshop we do called Review, Refocus, Recommit. It's time to review, where are we now? What's the new normal? What's the new normal for your markets, for your customers, for your suppliers? And now what's missing? So there's a new set of gaps in the marketplace. There are new services to be provided. And now's the opportunity for you to change. You've been in business, so you know the way the game is played in your industry or your line of business. And you know who the competitors are, who survived, and new competitors probably. So it's time for you to either reset the playing field or lead the field, as we would prefer. And it is important, too, that your culture becomes one of innovation. And it can be a unique advantage for you. So one of our clients said, innovation has to be the way we breathe. Innovation in our definition, which may be different than others, is that it's not just an idea, it's not just an invention, but it actually gets put to use. So think about the fact that you need your invention and great new product or service to actually be used so that it benefits the world. So we end the innovation with a diffusion or emplacement, emplaced in the world. And these three phases are different from each other. So Tim, do you want to chime in here?
Yeah, what's interesting, whether you're doing a project or you're running a team or you're growing a project management office or you lead a division or you're a CEO, CXO, CTO, is that you really get to a place that sometimes, solving the problems that you're trying to work through, you do need to adapt. And it's not just necessarily the business opportunity, but in many cases is even solving how your team is managing and delivering results. So we think in terms of, starting with the same elements that organizations or businesses might be thinking about, how do we put a new product to market? It also will boil back down to the fact that project teams sometimes need to go, you know what, this is not going fast enough. Or, hey, somebody just crashed the schedule and stole all our resources. So this whole, VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world that we live in, there are a lot of influencers that come in, and having, like you said, Rosie, that diffusion, or how do we implement this, and having the mindset isn't just about, having a framework to follow when you only do this type of project. It really becomes part of an organizational lifestyle. So it's exciting to watch these little ideas spring up and then begin to be implemented.
Absolutely, because people need to be able now to adapt to the way they work with each other. You'll notice that since Zoom kind of becomes our aisle when serendipity conversations occurred, those conversations are not as fluid as they were when we were in person. And so there are different ways in which people are working with each other, and some of those may change again here in the next year as people decide whether to continue to work from home or go into the office. And the whole culture and organizational style can be adapted as we go. So I'm going to move on then to recognizing that each of those three phases is unique. In the discovery phase, which we often call the fuzzy front end is before you can write a requirements document and before you can bring engineers to start doing architectural design. And so in the discovery purpose of that phase is to discover what's going on, discover the concept and the opportunities. It's exploration, it's research, it's going out, as Japanese would say, go to the gemba, which is where it's happening. Go out there and see how your product's being used. And there's so many different examples of how people from an engineering or a marketing perspective, how they were surprised by watching their market or their customers use their product. And so there's a lot of discovery that can be done. The second phase here is the development, engineering and developing the design and actually getting it into production, being able to deliver that product. And that's one where John and I have been using PMBOK and using task management systems, and a lot of those tools are what we grew up with. And then the third phase is this diffusion phase. How do you get it actually out into the marketplace and in use? In a service organization or a nonprofit, it might be actually getting into that area of poverty or a disaster zone where your service is of value. So that is a third and different phase requiring another unique approach.
Rosie, would you say that with these different phases that you would see a series of different skill sets applied, meaning that it's not one size fits all, right?
It's absolutely true. Let's take the middle phase, which is engineering and design. A project manager, product manager is destined to track a schedule. You have a really, a precise schedule. You've got trade shows, you've got PR, you've got production, you've got incoming suppliers for first test. But in the open-ended phase before that, the discovery phase, it's much harder to put a hard and fast schedule on those. In fact, one example we have is with Procter & Gamble, who did an extensive study of one of their very profitable product lines to find an extension to that product line. And when they did hundreds of videos of people using their product, they found out that the real problem was not in the way in which the floor was cleaned. It was in the way the user had to clean the mop. And so the Swifter was invented so that there was basically kind of a disposable surface and you didn't have to clean the mop anymore. So that open mind, the looking for what isn't obvious or isn't part of our assumption base is really important in that discovery phase. So you're right, Tim. There's different mindset and skills in each one. So where do we start? The phrase has always been the journey starts with the first step, but we really think that it starts with where you are right now. Certainly, if you're doing an exercise program, you have to start with what your body can do right now. You can't do yoga immediately. And we find that having an objective assessment of where you are gives you the identification of your strengths, what's working, what's not. Maybe you didn't even know something wasn't working. And it tells you where your innovation approach is functional now and where it's not so functional right now.
You actually have assessments that you do, which is, hey, we can quickly ask the right questions to identify, kind of where you're at and where you need to go. Because everyone is in a different continuum.
Absolutely. Yes. In fact, this is one of the things. We have a couple of different assessment tools we can use. We've developed these over several years, and we know that the outcome is an aha moment for the team. And so they're all team-based, run by individuals entering their scores, and then the cumulative score showing that to the team. So we do have those assessment tools available. The other thing about where to start, it's really important at the very beginning of an innovation journey to make sure that the leadership's involved and committed. And when we say leadership in this context, it's the person who can allocate resources, who can make sure there's focus and so on. We'll go through this in a minute. But the other thing about starting is just to learn about best practices, to be open to that and to new models and methods and things that you were previously unaware of, perhaps. And establish it as an organizational culture. Culture is how everybody thinks. So here's one of just a viewpoint on one of our substantial assessment tools. This is a huge assessment tool, but it's summarized at the end as to the stage in which your company is in its innovation approach. And so there's 5 different buckets, if you would. And the first being novice or ad hoc at innovation. Now, startups, of course, start with an idea, and it happens to be a great idea, and they become a unicorn. They may not have any way of doing the second product, or they may not have any way of replacing their own product. And so the next stage up would be to put in place some innovation frameworks, some frameworks by which they'll continue to have this discovery phase so that if their product goes slightly obsolete, they can quickly find the next opportunity. And we have some of those examples with some friends of ours here in Portland who are in the active growth. They're now realizing they need to have some structure around innovation and moving forward. The journeyman bucket then moves that up a little bit, and they have more written procedures. The processes are more ingrained. Individuals have the mindset of innovation. They have good terminology about innovation, and they practice it. The master innovator are those people who have it really dialed in, and they have people who are experts in the processes of innovation, as well as content experts. At the top, and we have a good friend who's one of these, he's an industry leader in that his innovation is so strong that he welcomes people to come and he will tell them all of his secrets about how to innovate in his company. So he's giving back to the industry and sharing his tips and techniques with others in his industry. And so we call that an industry leader. Another assessment tool which we can run for companies or for individuals is this simple one, which is how proactive are you? Innovation is a very proactive activity. It's always looking forward. It's always looking for what's new, improved, and not yet available. And so we have a simple way of asking each person on the team a couple of questions, and the culmination of those answers comes to this chart, which is what percentage of the effort of the company is reactive versus transactive versus proactive. And it's amazing when you pull all of those people's scores together, how the conversation flows from there, for one thing. And you'll see that the transactive is actually the part where money is being exchanged for the great product or service that you provide. And proactive is the time you spend in discovery or strategic thinking or reviewing where you are, doing competitive analysis and things of that sort in the proactive stage. Reactive is what Lean would almost call waste. It's stuff you must do, but it adds no value. And so that's what we would put in the reactive activities. I mentioned a little bit ago that getting your leadership committed and dedicated is important because they do provide the resources you need. So these are 5 different areas of leadership. Again, it's the person who can provide focus, but their commitment to innovation is important. They must understand that they are the ones who can make it a key organizational value. They're the ones who can open up your discovery phase to a variety of outside the company resources. They also are able to ensure that the mindset is everywhere. And by the way, these may be you. I mean, you may be that person, that owner who can allocate resources. So this may be you doing this if you're the CEO or the president, or you just may be that most influential person, regardless of your title. And then the fifth one there is that you would be able to understand the best practices. Even if you yourself are not the one running innovation, you may need to know how different each one of the phases are and what to expect from each of those phases. We want to talk a little bit about how those different phases of innovation show up in mindset and culture. In the discovery phase, it's much more out of the office, talking to customers, watching customers use your product or service. And development can be much more of that engineering, more individual skill sets are critical there. And then in diffusion, of course, it's seeing the delight on the customer's face when you deliver a product and getting that joy. So we call that from a promise to a practice. But that just kind of talks about the mindset. The other part of mindset is, in fact, you see this cat on this next slide? Thank you, Tim, for this picture. This is fabulous. This cat is staring at a barrier. This cat is staring at the gate, wishing it would go away or open up. And we get so focused on one barrier or one solution that we can't even look around and see what else might be the problem. And so this is when bringing other people into your world a little bit to collaborate with you is really important. Sometimes we need somebody else who can see the objective, bigger picture and ask them to help us out. And sometimes that's a humbling experience, but it's really important, or we're going to continue staring at this gate in front of us and not seeing where we could be. So the message here is to collaborate, talk to others, ask other people for their viewpoints as you go through the beginnings of the innovation program so that you can see the whole big picture.
You know, what I find funny is, again, as a CEO myself, which is fairly anomaly, as I am fairly creative, which means that I actually have to, drive and make sure things get done, and I do strategy planning. But in the tactical of managing a project, sometimes you're looking at the problem, and so you have to literally sometimes say, stop, let's walk outside, have a change of pace, let's think about this totally different. But I found that over the years, teaching is one of the most humbling opportunities to have your students tell you something that you would never think of. Like, where would you come up with that? I would never think of that in a million years. But it is exciting because you're right. In many cases, it really is the perspective that you can see.
Yes, it is. Exactly. In fact, that was the aha moment for a couple of companies we've worked with where somebody from outside was sitting there and said, well, what about XYZ? And they all just stared at him and said, of course. Oh, no, of course. And so that humbling experience, I just think how valuable that outside experience is. And, understanding the marketplace and the customer right now is so important because it is changing. It's, our ability to work virtually has dramatically changed in the last year. Our kids, my granddaughter knows how to use Zoom better than I do. And so we need to go out and deeply understand the world of the user. If you're in the service business, deeply understanding what the actual outcome is for your recipient, whoever the outcome is intended for, because the value is in their world, not ours, not yours. It's in their world. They evaluate, they decide, and they buy or they use your product or service. We mentioned the value of outside opinions and creating a team of diverse viewpoints and diverse skills and diverse experiences. But getting that group to work together has some facilitation best practices. Thanks to David Strauss for his book called How to Make Collaboration Work. These are the 5 principles that he has discovered over about a decade. And the first being involve all relevant stakeholders. And sometimes that's a little scary because you want to also make sure a stakeholder is somebody who could destroy your innovation idea. It could be somebody who maybe it's an investor and it's kind of risky to have them in the room, but it's important to have all of them there so that you get started knowing what the environment is for your innovation topic. The other is let everybody on that new team build consensus as you go so that there's no naysayers left over. You just address everything as you go along by creating a process roadmap also. Process roadmap will help everybody on the team know where you are in that particular journey and track the progress. And putting some celebrations in the middle of a long innovation project is a really good idea. If you've got a year-long discovery process or a 6-month or 2-month, whatever it is, make sure that you're acknowledging your progress. The other point that David made was designate a process facilitator. And you may end up wearing 2 hats at once. If you're the content expert, as I would guess many of you are, you may have to also wear the hat of a process facilitator. And so just recognize that the process facilitator is a little bit different, and the process facilitator has to grab group memory and keep people on track as to decisions so you don't re-decide things you decided last week, if you would. That collaboration and managing teams is an important part of innovation for project, program, and portfolio managers as they build innovation programs. So again, going from an expert to being an experimenter, that takes a change in mindset. You have to be willing and interested in what goes wrong, testing new ideas and learning from what happens. In Japan, they've also done a lot of good things in the engineering area. And John will go over these next 2 in his review of the fuzzy front end. But Japan did these things where they would postulate extreme solutions and explore limits and push boundaries. And those are things you'll want to do as well during this early stage. But it seems always to be true that we build on each other's ideas, customers, suppliers, outside people. It's an open journey to make sure that we have a wide variety of viewpoints. In that same realm, all of us think differently. We have different natural styles of thinking, and we have an assessment tool which has literally saved companies. It has been so valuable. It's a tool in which each individual person fills out a survey form and gets a result, a profile of the way they think. And it's just a natural profile for them. They get this individual score, but then we put that together as a team score and start to see where the holes are. There's an ideator type person, there's a driver type person, there's a person who likes to just get things done. And if you put that team thing together, you can see what you might be missing. And you do need that ideator, that person who just comes out with wild and crazy ideas that nobody would have thought of. And you need them as well as this collaborative diversity. So it's a balance, and there's a skill set all in itself to be able to identify those individuals, learn what fits them, and put them to their highest and best use for their purpose and for yours. So we also love this best practice, which is a continual set of questions. Every once in a while, when you're in the middle of a project, you're in the middle of a program, you're in the middle of development, and you've got a problem, let's say, or you're looking at a new product line. These questions just have been very helpful for us. You start with, is it real? Is it a real problem? Is it a real solution? Is it a real market? Is this a real customer? And then, is it worth it? So looking at what the costs are, what the risks are. Is this particular solution worth it? Is this problem worth solving? Is the effort going to be worth it? And then the last question is, can we win? Which basically means, are we the ones who could actually carry this forth? Are we the ones who could bring this to the marketplace? So those 3 questions, we've been using those for years, and they're kind of eye-opening, if you would. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back to John. And Tim, did you have any other things at this time, or shall I go ahead?
No, I think, we can make a transition, certainly. But, in terms of what that triplet questioning is, I think that's really, really helpful. Again, focus on what the real problem is. Is it really a problem? Is it really an issue? Is it really a market? In terms of ensuring that you are going to be laser focused. And then again, what is that solution? I can tell you that even in our ecosystem where we work in the project technologies and, with Microsoft and non-Microsoft organizations, sometimes they come together and they say, hey, look, we say, this is something that's needed in the marketplace. They go, great, we're not going to do it. It doesn't have big enough threshold. And so these opportunities come together. We've had partner companies work together with us to say, hey, let's blend your skill set, your technical resources, our ideas, and our rubric and our documentation, and let's get a product out to market. But neither organization could do both. And so by pairing together, there's great opportunities. But again, I think this is really a great place to start, especially when we think about innovation. So even let's say it's a project team and you don't have, let's say, the smartest developers, or you don't have all the assets or resources, doesn't mean that you can't pair or work together. But sometimes stepping outside of that situation and figure out what will it take to win is really helpful. And I see this day in and day out. It isn't just, inventing a new, iPhone, or it's not inventing a new software widget. It could be just solving things of how culturally we roll something out. And so I think this is these techniques and principles. I know John's going to show some really cool stuff here in a moment. They pay huge dividends by just applying this both daily, practically, personally, and even professionally in an organization.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's great.
Okay, so I'm going to jump into an actual framework that we use. It's one of the primary frameworks that we use and developed early on. When we started our company, we interviewed a whole bunch of program managers and asked them, what is the most difficult problem for you? And overwhelmingly, they basically said the fuzzy front end of projects drives us nuts. People sit around in meetings, the engineers sit around in meetings and toss ideas around and around and around, and it never seems to converge, and so it drives us nuts. And so we decided that we would focus on that problem. But one of the problems that causes the problem is what I'm going to talk about in these two slides here. The first one being this concept that you need the left brain work. You need the analysis, the market situation, customer analysis. You need to list out your goals and requirements and all that kind of stuff, and do risk assessments and opportunity analysis in the market. But you also need the inspiration. And if you don't have those in equal measure, you'll end up with an unbalanced project, in fact, not a very innovative project. So there are ways to get both. So there's a method called copy that we basically use and adapted ourselves to innovation and teaching people to be innovative. We call it copy, adapt, improve, invent. So when you get to a place, let's say you're going to do a new website. Well, first thing you should do is go out and look at all the other websites that you think are cool and useful. And maybe you just take your website and you just copy theirs. Of course, you don't publish it because that's plagiarism, but for your own purposes and your own thinking, you just copy it. And then you say, okay, I can move this around here, move this here to adapt it to my situation. And then once you do that, you're going to see obvious improvements. And then finally, you'll be in a position to invent. And the analogy I like to use is, unless you're Jackie Chan, you can't jump from the first floor to the second floor of a building. We have things called ladders and staircases. And this is a sort of a ladder or a staircase that allows you to take something that's kind of a little bit too big to do in one step and get you there step by step. And we're not saying to plagiarize, but we are saying to use other great examples from other fields to get you started. So this slide basically talks about that dichotomy of analysis and inspiration. The next slide is sort of a variation on this, and that is the concept of a structured framework or structured processes and things like best practices and heuristics, which are basically processes that you find out work. You don't know why they work, but they just work. Versus the unstructured work, which is serendipity. You luck out, you experiment, you get ideas from the results of experiments, or customers say, well, what if you did this thing? And in math class, when our daughter was in high school, they had a thing called the guess and check. And so you take a guess and then you see how it went. And then there's just luck. Now, as a phenomena here, we've noticed that a lot of the books and a lot of the consulting companies tend to say innovation can be a process. But in fact, when we looked at literally hundreds and even thousands of innovations, fully 50% of them didn't come from a structured process. It came from serendipity. So the question is, how can I increase my chances? So we want a framework that can handle both. So I'm going to give you now a picture of a framework that we developed right at the beginning of our founding of our company. And it built off of the basic DC cycle, or divergence convergence cycle. We noticed by doing a lot of PERT charts, and Tim, you'll probably remember PERT charts from days gone by. They're still good. Mm-hmm. I have done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of PERT charts for projects. And what I noticed is they start at a point, they expand. If you just look at the envelope around a PERT chart, it starts at a point, it fans out, and then it converges on the other half. It's just the natural way project works. So the envelope is basically divergent activities. One activity spawns several activities. And then you get to a point where it starts converging again. But the big discovery that we made at Innovation Frameworks is that the real innovation happens in the center part, this very interesting area that we now call the emergent part. So we have the divergent, the emergent, and the convergent parts. And then we clarified kind of on the vertical axis of this, the difference, if you could look on the left here, after project initiation, we divide the world into sockets and plugs. We used to call it yin and yang, but that was too woo-woo for a lot of people. So we just changed it to a term that engineers are used to, which is sockets and plugs. And our saying is basically define the sockets before you design the plugs. It's so natural for us to, especially for engineers, we love our technologies, we love our solution ideas, we love our ideas. We think that what we invent are opportunities for our clients. But it really should be driven by the sockets. Earlier when we talked about going out and talking to customers, really going out and finding ways to understand what they need, what the markets need, what the customers really need, what the opportunities are for them, and then eventually what the requirements are. But then with that, in parallel, start developing the ideas to match those. But you end up with a whole bunch of data. So then you get over into the center section, and we have a phase we call cook and stew. And cook and stew is actually a really good analogy because when you cook a stew, what's happening is there's actually molecular changes that take place in the carrots and the meat and the potatoes and so forth. There's molecular changes that allow those things to start fusing and working together to make a stew, which is something new. And that's analogous to what you do when you think about stuff. So Rosie told me that somewhere it said that, who was it? Bill Gates purportedly reserves a certain amount of time each day and each week, and like 2 weeks a year, for just thinking about things, letting the right brain get to work, letting them dream, letting them just soak and so forth. This is a very, very important part of innovation. But when you're done cooking and stewing, you end up with a whole bunch of ideas, and it can be very confusing. And the Japanese, the Toyota came up with a system called set-based design, which we adopted. And the idea is that you say, okay, there's so many different alternatives. Let's just pick some kind of prototypical alternatives, like say 3, 5, 7 alternatives, and flesh those out to some degree. And then the complement to that, we discovered, is a whole technology developed by some people in Israel called critical factor analysis or parameter design. And it's a methodology to evaluate each of those sets of alternatives and come up with ways to decide which one they're going to choose, but also how to combine the best of each. Then you get over to the convergence side, and we divide this into 2 parts, converging to the product definition, but also at the same time converging to a value proposition. In other words, how you're going to set up for your business model. And so you might also say converge to a business model for the product. And then finally, a very important one, and we owe this to our friend Dorian Simpson, who had this phase at the end of his cycle, and that's cultivating the next phase. So the next phase you see over in this diagram is the what Rosie mentioned, the mainstream engineering development, and then the market development where the diffusion takes place. So what we're doing here is preparing for the next phase, but it's not enough to just throw the requirements across the fence. And we have done a lot of consulting, especially in high-tech companies in the Portland and Oregon area, where over and over again, we had problems because the engineers, the marketing people would throw a set of requirements over the fence to engineering, and engineering would scratch their head and not really know what to do with it. And so the ones that were successful were the ones where they became a team right at that intersection. And the people that working on the fuzzy front end cultivated the relationship and the knowledge and shared the experiences and why they believed what they believed in the engineering development team. So now if you go back and take a look, like the cat steps back in the box, if you look at this overall, what you see is a system where you can plug into each of those hexagons there very creative ways to do each one of those things. So here's a framework for action. You do these things in that block, but you can be very creative and very discovery oriented at every one of those parts. And so that's the framework. We use this framework everywhere. We use it in our personal lives. We use it in the way we run our own business. We use it with almost every single customer we have, this fuzzy front end framework, because it really works well, and it does what I call helps you with sense making. You're trying to make sense of a mass of data that you're uncovering and put it into some kind of structure. And so this framework helps you define the project as you go along. At this point, I just wanted to summarize what we talked about today, and these are some of the key takeaways, some of the key best practices. We start with an objective assessment of where you are, and by objective, we mean somebody else than yourself, looking and saying, okay, here's what we see, and we actually have some tools that are used to do this assessment, so it is objective. You're not making excuses for yourself, and although it's sometimes painful for people, they will thank you afterwards. That's one of the first things we do when we're working with clients is start with an objective assessment of just where they are. Rosie shared a little bit about our assessment tool that we developed earlier with the trade association, and it's a very powerful assessment. Everybody thinks that they're a journeyman, but almost everybody is actually, even the brilliant engineers are often, the company's really at ad hoc in terms of their actual ability to re-innovate. The second thing is to drive innovation from opportunities, not from ideas. Ideas are at the service of innovation, and yet almost every book you read, all these webinars and everything, they say, oh, it's all oriented around great ideas. We want great ideas, and then try to force fit the square idea into the round hole of the actual real world. But if you go out and start with opportunities, and that means opportunities for you, but also for your customer, if you start from there, then you can use that to generate the ideas and use that framework that I mentioned. The third thing to take away from this is that there are three distinct phases: discovery, design, and diffusion. And they, as the Japanese saying goes, they're 90% the same and different in all important respects. The management of discovery is different than the management of design, and the management of diffusion is different from the management of design. Diffusion is a much more of a campaign and turn on a dime type of activity, and discovery is going to be based on what you discover, not on a schedule. And then the fourth one, Rosie mentioned quite a bit, is cultivating an innovation mindset. And it's so easy to just plug in a standard solution and have a get her done attitude, just do it attitude, and that's fine if you want to be mediocre. But if you want to be really great and come up with the things that aren't obvious to everybody else and make you stand out from a crowd, you really have to develop an innovation mindset in everyone. And then the Shrello questions, is it real? Is it worth it? Can we win? That should be what I call a burning question. Burning question is a question you have all the time in your mind. Is this a real opportunity? Is this a real product possibility for us? And then is it worth it? Can we win? And then finally, this is a hard one for people, but respect both processes and serendipity and innovation. And this is especially hard for people that are really just trained in something like PMBOK, where, if your only tool is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If your only tool is PMBOK, everything looks like a set of the 6 or so process areas. But it's very important to respect the I'll call it the non-rational and serendipitous parts, and figure out how you can meet schedule anyway, despite that. That's kind of it. We put a URL down there for you to, if you have some more questions. We're also offering a 30-minute free consult. That means basically you can give us a call and no pressure. Believe me, we are the ultimate of no pressure sales. But we'd be happy to just chat with you about your situation and answer any questions you'd like to have about this presentation or anything you have. And if there's something more that we can do to help you and also to help Advisicon help you, we'd love to do that. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Tim. Unless, Rosie, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, thank you very much. That's it. Tim?
Wonderful. Well, what's interesting here, and again, probably went a little bit longer than we normally do, but I know how much information you guys boiled down. So as an organization, whether you're a project manager, you're a business leader, you're an innovative manager or a CTO or a CIO or CFO or CEO, that these are many practical pieces. And a lot of this isn't just something you read a book and quickly go out and implement. And I think this is where I really have enjoyed working with you guys over the last 20 years, and not just in program and product delivery, but the process of thinking about a better mousetrap, right? How do we solve, what's the solution? What's the opportunity that's out there versus just continue to push one thing all the time? And so this is a blend of both that methodology, best practices, and design, but then there's this whole innovation side that a lot of organizations struggle with. So I encourage people, if you have any questions anytime, John and Rosie are an amazing couple. They have so much experience. Rosie's one of the best PMO managers I've met in this entire planet, and yet she's working in an innovation side. And John, when you meet John, he and I have way too much fun together. But we really get our creative juices going. And so this is great to be able to say, hey, it's not just about idea generation. It's about really getting to results. So I encourage everyone to reach out. You've got the contact information here on the screen. If you're watching this video later, that's fine. You know us, we do technology and project management, and we weave those together, but we would be nowhere without innovation. And so loving looking at the bleeding edge, at the leading edge, and kind of thinking forward, and then having that cycle of, hey, listen, just because we innovated a few things, we need to continue. The world is constantly changing. We need to be adapting, and certainly as we've seen with COVID and all the chaos that's going out there, you couldn't ask for a better time. So for everyone, John, Rosie, thank you so much for being here today. We appreciate it, and I look forward to answering questions or pointing people directly to you. And I think this is just part of one of the series. You're going to be recording and putting several series out there for people, including training classes. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. And we're hoping to do another one that gets into more detail about how to actually implement what we talked about today, only in the Advisicon world with something real in terms of the world that your customers live in.
Yep, it's always fun. All right, well, thank you, everyone. And again, appreciate John, Rosie, for being here today. Again, what a treat. It's always fun to work with you guys. And again, some of the innovation process that are going on.
Likewise, we really appreciate Advisicon and everyone that's out there listening to this webinar. Look forward to the next one.
Thanks now. Bye, everyone.